All right, getting started. This is just a piece of scrap wood I had. It's 12 inches tall by 5 inches wide. So you can adapt this pattern to just about any rectangle size piece of wood you have. And what I've done first is I've basted in with a coat or two of Moody Blue. It's kind of one of my favorite colors. And I used a foam sponge roller so it would have a little bit of texture but not too much. And you also want to sand it to knock the roughness off of it, not the texture so much, but the roughness, so that your paint will go on a little bit easier. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to put out a little bit of Moody Blue, Warm White, and Aqua Sky on my palette. And I'm going to be stenciling some snowflakes on the background. And I'm going to use Tim Holtz stencil because it has a little bit larger snowflakes. And then I'm going to just use an assorted snowflake stencil that I cut myself. But get yourself a couple of stencils. You can get them on Amazon, get them from Cupboard Distributing, and just something with larger flakes and smaller flakes, so you can get quite a variety on your piece. So put out a little bit of Moody Blue and Aqua Sky and Warm White on your palette. And what we're going to do is we are going to stencil snowflakes using these three colors, or a combination of these three colors, just to add some interest to our background. So I'm going to start off with some larger snowflakes, and I'm going to pick up Moody Blue and Warm White. I want to make just a little bit lighter value of Moody Blue. Actually, a little bit lighter than I anticipated, but I think it'll be just fine. And so I'm going to just start stenciling some of these larger snowflakes on with Moody Blue. And see how that's kind of pretty. And I'm going to come over here, and now I'm going to pick up that light Moody Blue and pick up just a little bit of Aqua Sky on it, just to make it just a hair different in color. I don't want these to all be exactly the same. And of course, I'm not using the whole snowflake there. Some of them are going to go off the edge. And I think I probably need one over here. Again, I'm going to pick up more Aqua Sky. So this one's going to be a little bit even more on the aqua side of the color. Now I'm going to kind of stop in the middle of this one and pick up some Warm White. And I'm going to come in with even lighter on one side of it, just to vary that color a little bit. And I think that looks pretty awesome. So just go around and add some different size snowflakes all along the background. And we're just going to do this. I'll probably fast forward. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my smaller stencil, and these snowflakes I'm going to keep more on the lighter side. So I'll still pick up some Moody Blue, but I'm going to lighten it up quite a bit, lighter than I did the larger ones. And I'll probably pick up a little bit of the aqua sky in there. And so these I'm going to add all around, again, in between. And if you're going to overlap, which I will, a snowflake, you want to make sure you're doing it with a little bit lighter color than the snowflake is behind it. So I kind of like this shaped snowflake, so I'm going to add several of those before I move to a different shape. And again, I'll probably fast forward. Okay, so I've got a nice background of snowflakes here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do some spattering. Alright, so I've dried my surface. Now I'm going to give it a coat of water or flow improver. I like to use flow improver because it gives me a little bit more open time than water. And it's not so much that it's going to run, but it's more than just a thin coat of water, because you do want your splatters to kind of bleed. So now I've given it a coat of water. Now I'm going to thin down some white paint, maybe put a little bit of aqua sky in it. So I'm going to spatter, and the way I like to spatter is I like to thin down my paint and then pick up a brush and hold it with the bristles in my hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to beat the handles together so you can see how nicely those spatters are bleeding. Nice. I really like that. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll come back and spatter one more time. Alright, I'm going to spatter this one more time, but this time I'm going to do it with straight warm white, and I'm not going to put down that layer of water first, because I want these spatters to stay more intact. So I'm going to thin down some warm white paint with my large flat brush, and again I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to beat handles together, and I get nice spatters that stay confined in their own little circle. Alright, cool. I'm liking that background. So the next step is going to be to let this dry and put the pattern on for our the little container, the sticks, and the snowman heads. So we'll be back and do that when I'm done with that. Alright, so I'm back. I put the pattern on for the container, for the snow on the ground, for the snow that's in the container, for the sticks, the shape of the snowman heads, and their hats. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to float some shading on the background around this design, all of the elements of it, and then also around the outside edge. And I'm going to do that with soft floats of deep midnight blue. So you want to get out your favorite flat brush for floating, blend your deep midnight blue out pretty well. You don't want it to be too dark, and you're just going to start shading on the background next to the design. So here I'm next to the container, and I'm going to go above the snow here. I'm just going to start shading on the background so that this design will pop off the background once I get it painted. And it is much easier to do the shading before you've based things in, because if you get inside the design, it doesn't matter, you're going to base over it. So just go around, bounce around, and let places dry and everything like that. So I'm going to continue floating the shading, and then I'm going to fast forward. Alright, so just keep an eye out. Stop this when you need to. Skip it when you need to. But I'll be back when I'm done with the shading. Alright, I think I have everything shaded around. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade around these three sides with the deep midnight blue. Alright, so the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to base in the container with a coat or two of country red. Alright, so I've got my container based in with country red, and what I want to do is I kind of want to work wet on wet to get my shadows and highlights in. So I'm going to keep my brush loaded with country red, the base color, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of black plum, and I'm just going to kind of wet on wet blend this into the side, starting on the left side, and I'm going to blend that in to my wet color. Pick up a little bit more and blend some more in. You just want to get some dark color, and we will come back and actually float a highlight also to give it even more depth. I mean, float a shadow, not a highlight. So I even want to get up here on this rim and pull that across a little bit. Don't worry too much about getting on your snow, because it'll cover just fine. So I've pulled a little dark color in, and I'm going to pick up country red, and I'm going to load my brush with some heritage brick, and I'm going to blend that color kind of through the center a little bit, still a little left of center. So pick up some heritage brick and kind of softly slip slap and blend that back into that darker color. And now I want my brightest highlight to be right here. So I'm just going to wipe out my brush, and I'm going to pick up some melon, and I'm going to blend the melon and I'm being really rough up here at the top, into that heritage brick. See, I'm slapping the paint on, and then I come back and I blend it a little nicer. So I just want to get that paint down and then come back and soften and blend those edges a little bit. So I really want to work it back into that heritage brick. Okay. And then I'm going to come back in, and I want to darken up this side a little bit. So I'm going to come back with country red and then back into my black plum and darken up this side. So I'm going to turn it this way so I can just work it a little bit easier. So I'm just getting my black plum and blending it in back into that light area. So we started with black plum, then we moved into heritage brick, and now we're back into black plum on the edge. And like I said, we'll come back and we'll float some of this color just to define it just a little bit more. I'm going to wipe my brush out and come back in here and get those colors blended together. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here and I'm just going to drop a little bit more melon in here because I want to brighten up this highlight a little bit, especially on this top edge. So I'm just going to pull that down. And this is something you could come back and play with back and forth between those 4 colors. I think I'm getting a nice graduation of color there. All right, maybe a little bit up here. Okay, cool. I'm liking that. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some shading and do a final highlight. All right, so I've dried this area, and now I'm going to come in and I'm going to do my shading with black plum. And this is going to be just a regular side load float. And I'm going to go up here on this rim, and I'm going to float and kind of walk that color across that rim just a little bit. And I'm going to come down to the body of the container, and I'm going to float black plum down the sides, and eventually it'll go all the way across the bottom. If you have a mop brush and you like to mop your floats out to soften them, this is a good time to do that. I'm going to go over and do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to go up this side. And I'm going to go here on this part of the rim that we can see. I'm also going to float along the bottom edge here above the snow. Mop that out and soften it a little bit. And what I really want to do is when these floats are dry, I'm going to come back and walk that float into the corners a little bit, into these V areas, to round it just even a little bit more. I'm also going to float on the body of the jar or the container under the rim. So I want to set that rim above and on top of the body of the jar. So I'm just going to float right across those highlights and make that rim stand out a little bit. Okay, so let's dry this real quick, and then we'll come back and we'll hit those corners, those V areas, and deepen and widen those floats out. And again, it's just with black plum, just a side load float. And all you're going to do in this corner, I'm going to start at the side a little bit, drop some color in there, take it around that corner, but I'm going to walk that color out, just widen that curve. I'm going to do the same thing on the top here. I'm going to start a little bit off the side, off the, I'm not going all the way across, but I'm just starting a little ways past where the edge is, and I'm just going to walk that color into those corners, or out of those corners. I'll turn my piece over. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to start a little back of the side, and then as I come to that corner, I'm just going to start pulling that shadow out a little bit, filling up that corner with the dark. And the same under the rim, just kind of deepening up that V area. And this can be rough. It's okay. It's like a clay pot, so it can be rough. So we want that to dry. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do a reflective highlight on the sides. Just to, you know how there's always kind of that nice bluish reflection on the sides of things. So we're going to add that. So you're going to need a little bit of aqua sky. You don't need much because these are just small floats. And you want to blend it out, soften it a lot. And this float, as with any reflective float that I do, is going to be on the edge, but just a hair off the edge. So you come and float down the side of the rim, but you can see it's not right on the edge, it's just a hair off the edge. I think I need just a little bit more paint. I blended it out a little too well. So I'm going to go, and that I might not have blended enough, but it'll be okay. I'll mop it and soften it. So we're going to do that down the side also. Mop that out. And then, should we do the other side? Yeah, we'll do the other sides too. So I'm going to do the rim, staying right off the edge. And then I'm going to do this side also. And I'm going to mop that float out and soften it. All right, cool. We have one more highlight to do to this, and I'm going to highlight with some warm white. So you want to get out a brush that you like to dry brush with. I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight in this highlighted section just a very soft little bit of warm white. And this is going to go not necessarily all the way down, maybe let's go a little bit further. Just a nice little highlight, warm white. I think it needs to be whiter on this side. So aside from the lettering, the container is done. So we're going to move on up to the sticks that our snowman heads are on. So you're going to need some sable brown and some burnt umber. Okay, so on the pattern, these are just drawn on as straight sticks, and that was just to make it easier to apply the pattern and to float the shading around on either side of them that we did on the background. So what I've done is I've added some little squiggly twigs that come off of each of those sticks. And so with sable brown and a round brush, when you want to go ahead and base in those sticks, including those little squiggly twigs. So, and they can start down in where the snow is going to be. So you don't have to be real careful. They don't have to be perfectly straight because they're twigs. I'm going to do the little twigs on the offshoot there. Those little offshoots. One coat should do it. So now you're going to need your liner brush, and we're going to pick up some sable brown and mix a little warm white with it just to make a lighter value. And we're going to line some highlighting some lighter bark on each of these twigs. So no special way to do it, just think like a twig and just line highlighted rough bark on there. These aren't going to be technically correct twigs, but we just want to give the idea, the impression that we use little sticks as opposed to like dowels or something to poke into our snowman heads. Alright, and the same way with burnt umber, you're going to line the darker areas of that of the twig. So just your liner brush and thin burnt umber. You're basically going to be doing the same thing, except you're going to be going in between the light things that you lined on. So I'm going to go up the outside edge a little bit, through the center, just to give it the impression that it's got little rough bark looking like things. We're going to let this dry, or I'm going to dry it anyway, and we're going to come back and float some shading and probably line a little bit brighter highlight on them. And then I'm going to come back with my flat brush and I'm going to float shading at the top and the bottom and wherever they go behind something else with burnt umber. So I'll turn my guide sideways a little bit and I'll probably come along here and float in the bottom first. It really does make a difference. And then I'm going to come across and do the top. Oops, turn the brush over his hand. So wherever it's behind something or it is stuck into the snowman's head, you want to put a little bit of shading. And this is right here. And now I'm going to take my liner brush and warm white. And I'm just going to line some brighter highlights, keeping them mainly into the center of the twig and along the top of the little twigs that come off the main twig. So, and they're not everywhere, you know, they're not complete solid lines, they're just kind of hit and miss. Gives them just a little bit more depth and makes them look a little bit more dimensional, like they're a little rounded, not just something painted flat on there. The next thing we're going to be doing is we are going to be working on the snow, and I'm going to show you how I like to paint snow. But if you want to use a different technique, if you want to base it in and float highlighting and float shading, that's fine with me too. But I'm going to show you how I like to do snow. And the way I do that is the brushes that I use to dry brush with are also the brushes that I use to smoosh my snowman in. That's a very technical term, smooshing. And so when these brushes are new, they're kind of pointy, and that's a good place for it to be to build snowmen. And so what I like to do is my palette is pretty full here. I'm going to take my brush, I'm not adding water, I'm going to pick up some warm white on it. And you kind of load your brush like you were going to do stippling, but with stippling you usually kind of pounce off some of the paint on your palette. With smooshing you don't. You leave that paint in your brush, so it's loaded pretty good. So I'm going to work on this down here first. And so what I like to do is I like to start along the outside, and I'm just kind of tapping, not really lifting my brush off the surface so much. Kind of think like a sewing machine. you're going up and down, but you're never really losing touch with the surface. So I'm just gonna fill this area in, and what that does is it gives the snow some texture, and you can see the blue through the snow, which makes it look cold. So I'm just gonna go along and smoosh. I'm just kind of pushing the paint where I want it, and it's okay if it has fuzzy edges because it's snow. Snow doesn't have a nice soft edge. Okay, so you can kind of see it gives it the look of snow, the look of being cold. So I'm just going to smoosh in this paint and fill up the snow that's in the jar here. And the snow comes down onto the rim, so that's why we didn't worry too much about the rim when we were doing that wet on wet shading and highlighting. There's a nice drip coming off this side. Okay, so I've got that first layer on there. I'm going to let that dry. So while that dries, I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to add the snow along the bottom. And it's the same thing, just kind of push that paint around to fill up the areas that you want. If you want to pile your snow higher, go ahead, make more piles. It's perfectly fine. It's your snow. Right? So there. I'm going to do the same thing to all 5 snowman faces. So I'm going to turn this over so I can not have my hand in the snow. So I'm going to start laying down the snow around the outside edge, setting in the shape. And this is another reason why it's handy to do that background shading before we do these snowmen, before we build them. So this is how I build my snowmen. Very rare that I just base in a snowman. I almost always build them this way. And just going along the outside edge, defining the edge, but making it fluffy. Up under the hats. And this actually is a pretty simple and fast way to do snowmen. On this guy that has the ear muff, I'm just going to go right through the ear muff for right now, because I can paint that back on top. He's a pretty round one. Two more. And we can call the first layer done. The brush I'm using is a size 14 short round sable. You could use a 12, you could use a 10. 14 is just a nice size for this, so I don't have to work too hard. And the last guy. I have been building snowmen like this for probably 30 years. Of course, I live in Southern California, so I never get to build the real ones. Okay, so got my snowman heads smooshed in and the snow in the jar and along the bottom of the jar. Now this is dry, or dry enough, so I'm going to come back and I'm going to smoosh it again, but this time I'm going to start in the areas that I want to be highlighted, the ones I want to be brighter. So I want this to be brighter up here, so I'm going to start there and lay down most of that paint there. And as I run out of paint, I'm going to back it off and step away from that highlighted area. So I'm leaving some of that blue showing through. Here I want to get this highlighted here across this top edge. But I'm not gonna smoosh this all over. It's just gonna be where I want highlights, where I want the whitest snow to be. I'm gonna do a little here, and I might even make a little ridge here. So I've left some blue showing through here to give me a shadow. I'm gonna add a little bit here. Go down here. It's just kind of, if it's kind of like highlighting but without floating. I want this here to be lighter. So I have places that are still showing the blue through, and that gives the look of little piles and folds and creases in the snow. And the same thing I'm going to do down here at the bottom. I want this right here to be the lightest, and then I'm going to maybe do some lighter here and make it look like there's a little ditch or a fold or crease in there. And so this one I'm going to pull it off here to give me a little crease. So there, I didn't put down quite as much white. I left that blue showing through to give me the look of movement in the snow. So on my faces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pattern out and just kind of eyeball my pattern here. And I'm going to decide where the center of the face is going to be. So like on this guy, the center of his face isn't right directly in the center. It's a little right of center. So I'm going to start laying down most of my paint right of center. And I'm just going to kind of go in a circle, because as I run out of paint, I want to be off in the edges, so that right of center is going to be the brightest, whitest area. On this center guy, his is kind of right in the center, so I'm just going to start smooshing and laying down that paint in the center. And I'm going to wipe out my brush a little bit, get rid of a little bit more paint, so that as I get out to these edges, I'm not laying down as much paint, and I still have that blue showing through to act as a shadow. This guy, his is right of center also, is where his center of his face is. So again, I'm going to start just a little right of center, and then work that paint out to around the back edge here where it still stays blue. So it's not a completely smooth snowball. It's got some texture. This guy's here. So I try to use that blue background to my advantage. I'll still float some shading on this guy, but I don't have to do much, because I've let the blue background give the look of texture and roundness. And this one's, his is a little bit, it's in the center, but it's a little low center. It's not right smack dab in the middle. It's a little dropped. Okay, cool. There we go. We got that. Snow was easy peasy. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to let these guys dry, and then you're going to put the pattern on for their eyes, nose, and mouth. Okay, so we're going to work on our snowmen. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give them some nice round cheeks. And we're going to do that by dry brushing the cheeks on with melon, plus just a touch of country red. So all I did is I loaded the brush I'm going to dry brush with some melon, and then I picked up just a little bit of country red to give me a nice kind of corally red. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brush nice little round cheeks. It sits right on top of their smile line, right under their eye and right next to their nose. And you can go ahead and do both cheeks, dry brushing right through the nose, because the colors we use on the nose will cover that up. So they each get 2 little cheeks. Alright, we are going to work on our snowman noses now that we have their cheeks on. And I'm going to get a little close to a couple of them so I can show you how I do noses. It's going to involve 4 colors: burnt orange, moon yellow, burnt umber, and warm white. And you're going to need your liner brush or a small round brush. All right, I'm just going to use my liner brush. This is I think it's a #1 liner. It's usually the size I like to use. And so we are going to paint these carrot noses. And I paint carrot noses just a little bit differently than most people. And so what I like to do is I like to, first of all, I want you to think like a carrot. A carrot isn't just like a triangle shape that's highlighted on the top and shaded on the bottom. It's a root vegetable that has nooks and crannies and texture, and so we want to paint it like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load my brush with some burnt orange, and most likely I will work on like 2 noses at a time, but all of them are going to go through these same steps. So I'm going to think like a carrot. Carrots aren't flat, they're round, and they have ridges. So I'm going to start at the wide end of this carrot nose, and I'm going to start stroking on the shape of the carrot nose. Now it's curved, it's not straight up and down, because I want it to have the look of being curved. I want it to have some dimension. So I'm just going to go through, and as I go down the nose, my little strokes get smaller, and hopefully you won't have that little booger that I just got. So I'm just going to take that off. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and go over to this little, maybe I'll go over to this guy and do his nose too. But I work wet on wet to paint these carrot noses. So again, you can already get an idea of the ridges that you need to have in a carrot nose. Okay, so I'm just going to wipe my brush out on my paper towel. It still has burnt orange in it. I'm going to pick up some moon yellow, and I'm going to stroke the highlights in the top half of each nose that I've done so far. So I'm just going to come across, and I'm going to try not to make these end in the same place. I want to vary the parts where they end, and as I get down here I just kind of tap it off. I'm going to do this little guy same way. Just going to add some moon yellow highlighting across the top. So then I'm going to just wipe my brush out again. I'm going to turn my piece over because it's easier to do this way as I knock over all my bottles of paint. And my brush still has burnt orange in it, and I'm going to add a little bit more. And I'm going to pick up some burnt umber. And I'm going to, just like I did with the moon yellow across the top, I'm going to pull burnt umber across the bottom. And again, I'm going to vary where that ends and tap it off. This guy gets the same thing. And I'm just going to line that shading along the bottom of that nose. So now I can turn it back over again. This time I'm going to clean my brush out, and I'm going to pick up some warm white. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to tap a highlight across the top of the nose with warm white. Now if you notice, it's not right along the top edge. I've dropped it down a little bit. So it's kind of just a hair below the top edge. You're going to add a little warm white highlight. Now there's one more thing that I do to these, but they need to dry before I can do that, and that's just a little bit of a reflective float across the bottom, and just like we did with the container, that's going to be with Aqua Sky. So I'm going to go through and paint the remainder of my noses here, and then we'll come in and do that reflective float. Alright, so now I'm going to add that reflective float to the lower edge, and yes, that goes right on top of that burnt umber shading that you stroked on there. So just a side load float of Aqua Sky, and it's just going to go along the lower edge just to make that nose look cold. It also helps clean up the edge of the bottom edge of your nose. So every nose gets a little float of Aqua Sky along the bottom. So that kind of gives the nose even more dimension and makes it look chilly. And that's exactly what we want. This is a snowman, by the way. Okay, so let's paint their eyes and line their mouth in with lamp black. So the eyes are just ovals. And yes, my eyes, one is always a little bigger than the other. It just kind of adds some character. So look, his face is coming to life even more as we add these eyes. Okay, so all our little guys have faces. What we're going to do now is we are going to give them some color in their eyes, in the bottom of their eyes, and we have to decide what color we want to give them. I'm thinking some of them are going to have green eyes and some of them are going to have blue eyes. So I'm going to get out Irish Moss, Moody Blue. You can pick and choose which ones you want to have blue eyes and which ones you want to have green eyes, but I'm just going to corner load and do a side load float of Moody Blue, and I'm just going to float a little C stroke of color in the bottom of each eye. Now let me see if I can get closer on that. So if you'll notice, it's not right on the very bottom edge, it's just a hair above that edge. Much like our reflective float, I wanted to keep it a little bit off the edge to leave some of that black showing around the bottom edge. So let's see, which other one would I like to have blue eyes? I think I'll make this guy have blue eyes. And you can change it up. If you want them to have purple eyes, they can have purple eyes. Whatever color eyes you want. And maybe this guy. So just a little C-stroke float of Moody Blue in the bottom of their eyes. And then I want these two to have green, the remaining two to have green eyes. And these guys, I'm going to float a C-stroke float of Irish moss in the bottom of their eye. And sometimes it might be just trying to just stick the corner of your brush in their eye and get some color down in the bottom there. They look pretty hideous now because their eyes are kind of blank still. So what I want to do now is I want to add a highlight in each eye. And so I'm going to just pick up some warm white on my liner brush, and I'm just going to add a highlight in the top of each eye. And it's just a little set down. It's not a stroke or anything. And then I'm also going to come back with some lamp black and just clean up these strokes in here so they look more defined. So I'm just going to paint in. See how much nicer that looks? Just going to clean up and give it a more definite edge on that stroke. So in all the eyes, I'm just going to clean it up. And you could do this before you do the highlight. But it just gives the eyes a little more definition. So much additional little details that bring these guys to life. So on the eyes that are blue, I'm going to pick up a little bit of Moody Blue on my liner brush, and then I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white. And what I want to do is I want to line a highlight on that blue stroke just down in the center. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a lighter blue stroke down in the center of each of those little blue strokes. And then the green ones, I'm just going to pick up some moon yellow and add a little moon yellow in the bottom of each of those strokes. What I want to do now is I want to take my liner brush and I am going to thin down some Moody Blue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line a shadow above each eye just to set that eye back into the snowball as opposed to it just laying there right on the top. So I'll get a little closer and show you what I'm talking about. So right above the eye, I'm going to start about halfway down on one side with this thinned Moody Blue, and then I'm going to come up and stop about halfway down on the other side, just to give the look that these aren't just sitting on top of the snow, that they're kind of pushed into the snow. And it's going to happen on all of the eyes, all 10 of them. So you just start about halfway down on one side, come on around the top, and then stop about halfway down on the other side. A little bit. We are going to work on these little branches that come out, and so I'm going to back up a little bit. What I want to do is I want to line the little stems of these branches with burnt umber, and I'm not going to highlight or shade them. but I am going to just line them so I know where I want to stroke on my pine needles. Keep your hands out of them. This is basically just to be a guide. And I have one here. So now what we're going to do is we are going to stroke on or paint on the first layer of pine needles with forest green. And what I want to do is I want to load my brush. It's a liner brush, and I'm going to load it with forest green. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten that brush tip out so it's square. I don't want a pointy liner. I want that squared off tip. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start painting short little squared off needles with forest green. Alright, so we've got some greenery in here now. So I'm going to clean out my brush, and I'm going to go back to the ones that I did first, and I'm going to stroke on some lighter pine needles. Same way, flattening out that liner brush to a square tip. These might go on right on top of the green ones I've already done, or they might go next to the green ones I've done. They don't have to be exactly on top. We're not over stroking, we're adding. So I'm going to work on these earmuffs first. And so they are going to be stippled in with lavender. So I'm just going to stipple in those earmuffs with lavender. So get out the brush you like to stipple with. Now keep in mind that the one on the right side is kind of behind his head, so you don't want to stipple it completely round. You want to keep it going behind his head a little bit. And this one can be a complete earmuff. So I'm going to pick up some lavender and then some warm white, and I'm just going to stipple highlights in the top of each earmuff. Wipe out your brush, pick up just warm white. There's still going to be a little purple in there, and tap the brightest highlight in the very top. We're going to take slate gray and we're going to line the band that's going from muff to muff. So you want some slate gray and your liner brush, and you're just going to line that band that goes from ear muff to ear muff with slate gray. Just wipe out your brush, pick up some warm white for a lighter value slate gray, and you're going to line a highlight on that band. Just lighten up that center. Wipe your brush out, pick up a little touch of lamp black, and this is where you're going to just pull the shading with lamp black where that muff goes, where that band goes into that muff, not where the muff goes into the band. Let's go up to this guy, and I think I want to paint his hat country red. So I'm going to base that in, his whole hat in, except for the little top pom-pom. But I'm going to base the hat and the brim in with country red. So while we let that dry, let's go ahead and base the top hat in graphite. And let's go ahead and base the this little pointy hatted guy in with moon yellow. Alright, and I think I want to paint this guy's hat in Irish moss. So we can go back to our red hat, and we are going to dry brush some highlighting on it with melon. So I'm going to dry brush through the center of the top of the hat here, and then also through the center of the hat brim with melon. Now, I'm not going to wash my brush out. I'm going to pick up a little warm white, make a lighter value of melon, and I'm going to dry brush a little bit brighter highlight. And this is going to cover a smaller area. It's not going to be quite as much as the melon was. And I'm going to line some warm white stripes on just the hat brim. So I'm going to get out my liner brush again, and again I'm going to flatten it out to a square tip so I can paint some stripes. And I always like to start in the center and work my way to the outside edges. So just lining or painting some stripes. And now with my liner brush also, I'm going to tap in the pom-pom at the top. I'm not stippling it because I can control where the paint's going a little bit better if I do it with my liner brush. So I'm just going to tap in that pom-pom with some warm white. I'm going to dry those stripes. And that pom-pom, and then I'm going to float shading with black plum. So a side load float of black plum. I'm going to float shading along the inside, the outside of each of the top here. So yes, it goes over some of those white stripes, but that's okay. So just both outside edges of the hat brim are going to get a float of black plum. And then I'm going to float on the hat above the brim to separate the two of them. And then I'm going to float down both sides of the top. Right, on this yellow guy, I'm going to dry brush highlighting with warm white, and it's going to go up the center and a little bit on the tail. So I'm going to start up the center, which is kind of in between his eyes. And then I'm going to come down on the tail here. I'm going to line some burnt orange, thin burnt orange stripes. So this time I am going to use my liner brush as a point, not flattened out. So I'm going to line some thin burnt orange stripes on this hat. Going to let those dry, and then I'm going to come back and float some shading on that hat. On our top hat, we are going to dry brush highlighting with Aqua Sky. So that's going to go through the center here. And I also want to dry brush on the hat brim. I'm going to pick up a little warm white, make a lighter value Aqua Sky, and dry brush a brighter highlight. Again, not as wide. And on the green hat, I'm going to dry brush highlighting with Moon Yellow. And so it's going to be, each section is going to get its own little highlight. So now while these hats dry a little bit more, I'm going to come back with some Moody Blue, blend it out really well. You want it to be soft. And I'm going to float shading on the snowman itself under the hats. So a very well blended out float of Moody Blue. Just going to go on the snowman under the hats. On this one with the ear muffs, you're going to go just around the one ear muff that's on top. So this yellow hat, I'm going to float shading on both edges of that, both of those long edges, with very well blended out burnt umber. So I'm going to go here across the bottom edge, and then I'm going to come up here and go across the top edge and down the back side. I'm going to take my liner brush in warm white, and I'm going to line a highlight in the center of each of those orange stripes. Just to give it a little bit more dimension. And then I'm also going to line warm white along that top edge, kind of like a band On the top hat, we're going to float shading with lamp black. So I'm going to float on the brim on either side, kind of walking that color across the brim a little bit. I'm going to go on the hat above the brim, and I'm going to go on the other three sides also. So top and sides are going to get this float also. So the top hat, I'm just going to give him a hat band of Moody Blue. So again, with my liner brush, I'm going to flatten it out a little bit and just line a nice little hat band of Moody Blue. Going to pick up some warm white on that dirty brush and line a highlight on that hat band with warm white. I will come back and stencil a snowflake on his hat, but I want this hat band to dry. On this green hat, we can do any number of things. We can take some lavender and add some lavender stripes to one of the sections. We can take some forest green, which is the color we're going to shade with, but we can add some dots, some polka dots with a wash of forest green to a section. So this is going to be something that you can do it exactly like I'm doing it, or you can create your own design on the sections, or you cannot have any design at all. It's completely up to you. And on the next section, I think I'm going to line a burnt orange plaid. So I'm going to go through the middle and then just add a little plaid. And finally, I think on that bottom section we can do some dots, small dots, and I'm going to use this drywall joint tape to add those. Get them up a little higher. Alright, so you can use any combination of little design touches that you want on those sections of that green hat. So I think I'm safe to go back and stencil a snowflake on my top hat. And I think I'll just use this one. So just a warm white snowflake. On his hat. So we're going to go to the green hat and we're going to float some shading on each of those sections with forest green. So each section is going to get its own little shading of forest green down both sides. Turn this over just to make it easy. Each of those sections gets a little shading down both sides. I also want to float some shading above each section to separate it from the section below it. And that too is with forest green. So I'm going to float a little forest green to separate that bottom section. Move up and separate the next section from the section above it. So now we're going to go down here and work on our lettering. And our lettering is just painted with warm white and our liner brush. Again, we're going to flatten that liner brush out so it has a square tip. And we're just going to line or paint that lettering on there. In the top of each letter, I'm going to line just a little bit of aqua sky. So just like in the top half of each letter. And then to the top and left of each letter on the container, I'm going to line a shadow with a wash of black plum. Okay, so what that's done is it's made that lettering kind of pop off that container a little bit more than if it was just laying there without a shadow next to it. So we're going to come back to our pine bushes, and I'm going to load my brush, my liner brush, flattening it out a little bit, and I'm going to pick up some Irish moss, and then I'm going to pick up some moon yellow, and I'm just going to line some lighter pine needles, and these aren't going to be as many. Just to give it some more dimension. We just have a couple more things to do and we'll be done. What I want to do is I want to float some reflective shadows on our snowmen. So again, with my flat brush and aqua sky very well blended out, I'm going to float a little bit of this aqua sky on this hat. I'm going to go on to the muff, the ear muff a little bit, doing it on the left side of the red hat and the left side of the ear muff, and I'm going to go on the right side of the other ones. So on the top hat, I'm going to float that down the left side, on the left side of the hat brim, and also, the hat band, and also on the left side of the hat brim. And on this green hat, I'm going to go, right side, going on the right side, just to give it a little more dimension. And then I'm going to go across the top of this and down across the top of this yellow one, which is going to involve going down the back side. I want to add a couple snowflakes to the container, and those are just going to be stenciled on with warm white. And they can be whatever snowflakes you want. So I might use this little one. And I'm not trying to make them opaque. I don't want them to be opaque. And I'll probably use maybe these two here, these smaller ones. Okay, cool. So I think that we can call this piece done. So this is just a collection of snowmen that I've put away for a snowy day fund, and I hope you enjoy them. They just each have their own little personality, their own little outfits, and I just really hope you enjoy them. And thank you for joining me again.